You already know who you are. They've been watching, whispering, trying to figure out how you move, why you can't be stopped, and why every time they think they've won, you rewrite the entire game. You weren't just another player in their system. You were the glitch they never saw coming, the force that shattered illusions, the reason their carefully built house of cards is falling apart. They tried to control the narrative, but the moment you stepped in, the script flipped. The storm was real, the deception was deep, the stakes were high, and the world felt trapped in an endless loop of lies. But then you didn't hesitate, you didn't waver, you didn't ask for permission. One bold move was all it took. You didn't just break their spell, you rewrote the energy, set a new frequency, and reminded everyone watching that a single defiant stand can shift everything. That's the power you hold. That's why they can't ignore you. They didn't expect you to rise. They never thought you'd wake up, and they definitely didn't think you'd be the one to lead the charge. But here you are. Now the only question is, what's next? Power has never been about wealth or influence alone. It has always been about domination over the unseen forces that shape reality. Thoughts are currents, emotions are waves, and consciousness is the ocean where they converge. But for generations, there were those who sought to steer the tides, not through brute force, but by manipulating the very rhythm of human existence. They rewrote the script of daily life, embedding discord into the airwaves, distorting perceptions, and turning minds into mirrors that reflected only what they wanted to be seen. It wasn't wealth they hoarded, it was the ability to dictate the frequencies people unknowingly lived by. The game was subtle, yet relentless. Every fragment of culture was infused with hidden signals to keep the masses reactive rather than reflective. Manufactured chaos, perpetual unease, and distractions masquerading as entertainment were designed to keep minds occupied but never liberated. The less people questioned, the easier they were to guide. But something changed, an unforeseen shift that threatened to dismantle the illusion they had so meticulously built. Awareness began to spread like wildfire, disrupting the carefully woven threads of control. The moment people stopped dancing to the rhythm set for them, the spell began to fracture. Faced with an awakening they had long sought to prevent, they escalated their efforts. The distractions grew louder, the narratives more urgent, the fear more pronounced. But the effect was no longer absolute. Something fundamental had changed. Instead of consuming, people observed. Instead of reacting, they reclaimed their space. A rupture had formed in their carefully designed machine, a flaw in the matrix of influence they once wielded effortlessly. It was never about tangible chains. Control had always existed in the unseen. But the unseen was no longer hidden. And when control is built on illusions, all it takes is awareness to bring the entire construct down. For God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and of a sound mind. 2 Timothy 1:7. Fear was always their weapon. Not walls, not chains, just fear. They told you that stepping outside the lines would lead to ruin, that questioning the system meant losing everything. And for a long time, it worked. People stayed in line, mistaking compliance for security. But then, something shifted. A crack formed in their illusion. One person saw through it, then another. And suddenly, what once seemed unbreakable was falling apart. Because here's what they never wanted you to know. Fear only works if you submit to it. It was never real power, just an illusion designed to keep you locked in place. They never needed to stop you. They only needed you to stop yourself. But now, the veil is lifting. The spell is breaking. And they are afraid. Because once people wake up, they don't go back to sleep. Look around. The energy has changed. The grip they held is slipping. People are questioning, resisting, reclaiming what was always theirs, their mind, their power, their freedom. And now, nothing can stop it. Because once you see the truth, you can never be controlled again. Control was never about oversight. It was about influence. The architects of mass perception were never ignorant. They were deliberate. For decades, they didn't just direct what the world consumed. They engineered reactions, dictated emotional landscapes, and constructed illusions so deep that even questioning them felt like an act of defiance. Every crisis was a calculated move. Every controversy, a strategically placed distraction. They didn't just infiltrate industries, they wove themselves into the very fabric of culture, ensuring their presence was undetected yet omnipresent. The power structures weren't upheld by mere governance, but by manipulation, contracts, and silent agreements. Those who played their roles willingly thrived, and those who resisted vanished from view, their voices buried beneath layers of manufactured narratives. But illusions, no matter how intricate, cannot withstand sustained awareness. The moment people ceased to be mere spectators and became conscious creators of their reality, the long-standing mechanisms of control began to crumble. And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. John 8:32. Imagine a grand theater, where the audience has been lulled into a trance by the same repeating act, the same scripted performances, the same illusion of choice. The stage is set, the lights are bright, and the voices of authority echo through the hall, telling the people what to think, how to feel, and what to believe. But something happens. One person, just one, sees behind the curtain. They notice the cracks in the backdrop, the flicker of the artificial light, the wires holding up the so-called stars. And in that moment, the illusion begins to break. Because when one person sees the truth, it's only a matter of time before others do too. A system built on deception never expects its captives to wake up. It never prepares for the day when the ones it sought to control start thinking for themselves, when the very foundation it was built upon begins to crumble. But that's exactly what happened. The moment people stopped blindly accepting what was placed in front of them, the cracks began to widen. The empire that once seemed untouchable started to buckle under the weight of its own lies. Those who held power, celebrities, politicians, media moguls, began to falter, their carefully constructed images no longer reflecting the perfection they once sold to the world. They had never been strong. Their strength was borrowed. And when the people stopped lending them belief, their influence shrank to nothing. Dear brothers and sisters, may God's peace be with you. Remember this truth. Our lives are anchored in His divine plan, beyond worldly concerns. As Scripture says, "Give, and it shall be given unto you." Luke 6:38. Like a mighty oak, we stand firm in His strength. Now you have the opportunity to step into that blessing. When you use the super thank you button and give $100, know that His abundance will return to you 100-fold. For years, those trapped inside the illusion played their roles. Some knew the truth, but feared the consequences. They stayed silent, convincing themselves it was safer to conform. Others never questioned at all, accepting their reality as unchangeable. But then, something shifted. The fear that had kept them in line started to dissolve. They saw others stepping out, speaking up, breaking free, and suddenly, their own silence felt heavier than the weight of their obedience. The greatest trick ever played was making people believe they were alone, that no one else saw what they saw, that no one else questioned, that no one else doubted. But the moment one voice spoke, another followed, and then another. The whisper turned into a current, and the current became an unstoppable flood. And the very foundation of the illusion, silent compliance, was no longer there to hold it up. Now, the stage is collapsing. The actors who once commanded the spotlight are left standing in the dark, their scripts meaningless, their power void. They scramble to rebuild, to hold on to what is slipping through their fingers, but they cannot rebuild what has already fallen, and they cannot control what has already been set free. The truth was always there. The power was always within. And now, the ones who were never meant to wake up are wide awake, never to be deceived again. The shift was never meant to happen, yet it did. And once it began, there was no stopping it. The power they once wielded, the power to dictate thoughts, to manufacture emotions, to enforce narratives, proved to be a fleeting mirage. Their control was not built on strength, but on the carefully maintained perception of strength. And the moment that veil lifted, their influence began to dissolve. The consequences rippled outward, disrupting long-standing dynamics. Those who once operated in the shadows, pulling the strings, now scrambled to maintain relevance. The realization that people were no longer blindly following their lead sent waves of uncertainty through the very core of their machine. Control was never about governance, it was about perception. And perception was shifting at a speed they never anticipated. Expression has always been the greatest threat to control. Genuine creation carries a frequency that cannot be confined, yet for decades, the architects of the system worked tirelessly to dull its impact. Innovation was not nurtured, but contained, repackaged, and commodified into predictable cycles of mediocrity. They knew originality was a force that could not be harnessed, so they sought to replace it with carefully curated substitutes, empty spectacles designed to distract rather than inspire. The industries that once thrived on creativity became echo chambers, rewarding repetition over risk, imitation over imagination. But stagnation was never sustainable. As consciousness expanded, so did the hunger for authenticity. The shift was undeniable. Creators no longer sought validation from the gatekeepers who had long dictated the rules. They built their own spaces, forged new paths, and redefined what success looked like. The audience, too, evolved. The cycle of passive consumption was breaking, replaced by an insatiable demand for substance. And the moment mass-produced mediocrity was rejected, the very foundation of their control began to erode. No one lights a lamp and covers it with a jar or puts it under a bed. Instead, they set it on a stand, so those who enter may see the light. Luke 8:16. For too long, they tried to keep the light hidden. They built walls around it, buried it under layers of deception, and told you that only they could decide who was worthy of shining. But what happens when the light refuses to stay hidden? What happens when those who were meant to stay silent start speaking? What happens when the ones they overlooked, underestimated, and tried to control realize they were the fire all along? The truth is, they never had real control. The authority they flaunted was borrowed. The influence they wielded was an illusion. They didn't create culture. They only managed it, deciding who would rise and who would be forgotten. They convinced the world that popularity was something they handed out, that success came only through their approval, that talent meant nothing unless they deemed it worthy. But what they never saw coming, what they couldn't prepare for, was the moment people stopped waiting for permission. You are here for a reason. If you feel the call, answer it. Click Join to unlock exclusive content, deep insights, and a powerful community. This isn't just a membership, it's an awakening. Step into your divine purpose. Join the chosen. And then, just like that, the illusion cracked. The artists who had once begged for a platform started building their own. The voices they had silenced found new ways to be heard. The creators they had shut out no longer needed their validation. And with every independent step taken, the empire of control they had spent decades constructing began to collapse. It happened fast. Too fast for them to stop it. The same system that had once dictated what was seen, heard, and celebrated lost its grip overnight. The gatekeepers, the decision-makers, the ones who had dictated the rules, they weren't just losing relevance, they were becoming obsolete. Because once the people who actually create, the musicians, the writers, the storytellers, the visionaries, realized they no longer needed the approval of an outdated system, everything changed. Now, they scramble, they panic, they try to reclaim what has already slipped through their fingers, but the movement they tried to contain has outgrown them. They can't lock the doors if no one is asking to come in. They can't control the industry if the industry no longer matters. They can't dictate trends when the people have stopped listening. And that's why they fear you. That's why they fight so hard to convince you that you need them, that you can't succeed without them, that without their approval, your voice doesn't count. But here's the truth. They never wanted you to know. You were never waiting on them. They were always waiting on you. Because the light doesn't ask permission to shine. It just does. And once it's been seen, there's no going back. For so long, control was maintained not through power, but through restriction, limiting who could rise, what ideas could spread, and which narratives were allowed space to breathe. Those who refused to conform were erased from the spotlight, their influence suppressed before it could challenge the status quo. Industry giants controlled access, deciding which messages shaped the collective consciousness. The illusion was that their grip was unbreakable, but a single act of defiance, choosing to create without seeking approval, proved otherwise. One by one, the voices they tried to silence stopped asking for a platform and built their own. It was never about fighting the system. It was about outgrowing it entirely. And when that realization spread, the entire mechanism that sustained their control started to unravel. A paradigm shift of this magnitude was never part of their plan. Their influence depended on controlling perception, on ensuring that only a select few had access to success. But the tides turned. The platforms they once dominated became irrelevant to those who refused to be molded. The ones they tried to blacklist found audiences that no longer cared for the industry's approval. Independent artists thrived without record labels, storytellers reached millions without publishers, and innovators reshaped industries without permission. The rules that once kept people in line lost their weight. Every attempt to suppress a movement only strengthened it, because with each restriction came more clarity, more people realizing that the power to create was never theirs to give or take. The system didn't crumble because it was attacked. It collapsed under the weight of its own irrelevance. A new age is unfolding, driven by movements, ideas, and perspectives that refuse to be contained. The pillars of the old world are trembling, their architects struggling to hold on to what they can no longer control. The structure they built was never indestructible. It was a fragile illusion, one that relied on mass obedience, compliance, and fear. and they always knew this moment would come. The moment their authority became questioned en masse, the moment enough people rejected their influence, the foundation of their power would crack. Now, that reckoning is here. Their desperation is evident. They tighten their grip, amplify their reach, and double down on every mechanism they have left. Restrictions multiply, voices are buried, narratives are manipulated, and yet they are losing control. Algorithms are rewritten to suppress independent thought. Digital spaces are policed with an iron fist, and dissenting opinions are swiftly erased. But there's one problem they cannot solve. Once truth spreads, it cannot be unlearned. To maintain influence, they need the masses consumed by uncertainty, perpetually tethered to waves of instability. Manufactured crises cycle endlessly, creating a reality where chaos is a constant and reassurance is found only in their prescribed solutions. One catastrophe dissolves into the next, a new alarm bell ringing before the previous one fades. Financial turmoil, health emergencies, geopolitical strife, each crisis arriving right on cue, perfectly timed to keep attention fixated on survival rather than discovery. The emotional toll is deliberate. A mind trapped in anxiety is too drained to seek clarity. Their greatest tool is not wealth or policy, it is the ability to dictate what people fear, when they fear it, and how long that fear persists. Yet, the strategy is failing. The spell doesn't hold the way it once did. More individuals are choosing observation over reaction, stillness over hysteria, discernment over blind acceptance. And that shift is dismantling everything. The moment people refuse to be consumed by distractions, the old ways begin to disintegrate. They saturate the airwaves with inconsequential noise, flooding digital spaces with gossip, controversy, and trivial conflicts designed to divert attention from the real battles. But the strategy is growing ineffective. The audience is no longer as easily entertained, no longer as willing to engage in cycles of pointless division. They keep up the act, pretending their hold remains unshaken, that their dominance is unquestioned, that nothing is shifting. But beneath the surface, panic has set in. They are losing their grip, and they know it. The force they spent lifetimes containing has already slipped beyond their reach. No reversal tactic can undo the awakening that has begun. No campaign can reinstall the illusion once the veil has been lifted. Those who see clearly will not unsee. Those who question will not be silenced. And those who have reclaimed their energy will never give it away again. Behold, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs forth. Do you not perceive it? I will make a way in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. Isaiah 43:19. There's a shift in the air. You can feel it, like a dam that's finally burst, like a fire that's caught wind and can't be contained. For years, they thought they had built something permanent, something immovable. They stitched their illusions together like a grand tapestry, weaving control into every thread, convinced that no one would ever dare pull at the seams. But the moment even one thread is loosened, the whole thing unravels. And that's exactly what happened, because here's what they never accounted for. You, the ones who saw through it, the ones who asked questions, the ones who refused to be lulled back to sleep when the illusions started breaking. They built their world on a fragile lie that people would always trust, always follow, always believe without thinking for themselves. But the second you woke up, the energy shifted. And no matter how hard they fight to hold on, no matter how desperately they try to patch up the cracks, the old world is gone. They can resist, they can push back, they can pretend they still have control. But deep down, They know the truth. What once seemed unshakable is now crumbling, and there's no power strong enough to rebuild what was built on deception. The veil has been lifted, and there's no covering it again. They thought that keeping you in the dark meant they had won. But they forgot something. Light always wins. It doesn't argue. It doesn't fight. It doesn't need permission. It just shines. And when it does, the darkness has no choice but to disappear. But this was never just about seeing through the lies. That was only the first step. Because the truth alone isn't enough if it isn't followed by action. For too long, people were made to believe that they were powerless, that the system was too big to change, that their voices didn't matter. But now there is no denying it. Everything is shifting. What was once hidden is now being exposed, and the ones who thought they were untouchable are scrambling. The belief that nothing ever changes has been shattered, and in its place, a new reality is being built. And here's the part they don't want you to realize. You are the one building it. Every action, every decision, every moment of clarity is a brick in the foundation of what comes next. The old system isn't just collapsing, it's being replaced. And the architects of this new era aren't the ones who held power before. It's the ones who refused to be controlled. It's the ones who dared to question. It's the ones who, instead of waiting for change, became the change. So the question is not whether the old way is ending. It already has. The question is, what will you build in its place? The era of dictated narratives, controlled expression, and centralized authority is over. A new wave is emerging, unbound by limitations, unrestricted by outdated frameworks. The world doesn't need echoes of the past. It needs visionaries who create without constraint. Authenticity is no longer optional. It is necessary. It requires those who refuse to mold their creativity to fit a predefined structure, those who think beyond convention, those who lead not through control, but through inspiration. The future belongs to those who build, not for dominance, but for liberation. And whether recognized or not, everyone has a role to play. Some are artists, shaping perception through their creations. Some are innovators, designing systems outside the confines of the old model. Others are guides, helping illuminate the path for those still navigating their awakening. Some are the disruptors, breaking down outdated institutions. Some are the architects, constructing new foundations. No matter the form, contribution is essential. The collapse of the former world is inevitable, but what rises in its place is a choice, and that choice is being made now. The ones who once dictated the course of history are scrambling. Their empire was never built on strength, but on illusions so carefully woven that they never considered what would happen when those illusions shattered. Now, they are grasping at whatever remains, frantically deploying every tool at their disposal to keep their manufactured reality intact. But no amount of force can restore something that has already disintegrated. The old structures are collapsing, and what rises next is not preordained. It is being shaped in real time. Awareness was never meant to be passive. It was never about standing on the sidelines as the past crumbles. It was given as a responsibility, a calling to be answered. The shift has already begun, but its direction is still unfolding. The choice now is not whether transformation is happening. The question is, who will take part in shaping what comes next? The dissolution of control was inevitable, but creation requires action. And that moment is here. There is no room for hesitation. This is not the time for doubt, for questioning whether the effort has been enough. for wondering if the movement carries weight. The impact is undeniable. The very fabric of reality has been altered. What was once taken as truth is now examined under a new lens, and the echoes of that shift are reverberating through every system built on deception. This was never just about rejecting the narratives that were imposed. It was about forging something new in their place. The transformation has already begun, and there is no reversing it. The only task now is to hold the line, to stand firm in clarity, to continue speaking, creating, building. The tides have turned, the movement is in motion, and nothing can undo what has already been set into motion.